Hello and welcome to the magical world of G. Michael Vasey, where together we will explore the edges of reality. True tales of the paranormal, strange tales of magic and fairy, reality-based poetry and much, much more. For this edition, I want to continue with a magical theme and continue to explore the magic of connecting with the land. So who better to talk to about that than my good friend Sue Vincent? I have known Sue for a long time now, and we've shared many ups and downs of our lives, mostly by phone and email. We even wrote a book together about the magic of the hexagram, yet it wasn't until just a couple or so years ago that we actually met in person. Sue was raised in Yorkshire and was lucky enough to be exposed to magic and esoteric and spiritual thinking from an early age. These days, she's a very busy lady and one of the 3 directors of the Silent Eye, a modern mystery school founded in 2012. She and Stuart France, another of the directors of the Silent Eye, spend a great deal of time connecting with the land and solving esoteric riddles in the land of Albion. Together, as the characters Don and Wen, they explore the landscape and have penned a series of 8 books, beginning with the remarkable Initiate, recently reissued. She has also written many other books and blogs extensively at several websites, including her own Daily Echo site. Sue and Stuart also feature in my recent book, Chasing the Shaman. So I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce Sue Vincent. In Chasing the Shaman, I say that you said to me, go connect with the land. And it struck me that that might be a good first question. What do you mean by connect with the land?
It's a really good first question because I haven't really got an answer to that one. It's something that everybody has to find out for themselves. But spend time with it. Go and listen to it. Just sit in the grass, look at the daisies, watch the butterflies, find a stone or a tree, feel it. Imagine yourself being part of it and imagine its life being part of yours. And just listen. See what happens.
You and Stuart obviously have done this quite extensively in the UK, but for you, didn't it start with the birds?
Oh, when we were playing out together, the first day that we got together, we'd planned a visit to Wayland's Smithy, and we'd started off by taking a wrong turning. We tell the story in The Initiate, and ended up at Dragon Hill at Uffington, and things started to happen there. And the very first thing, I think, we saw a pair of buzzards overhead. And then a skylark just rose up in front of us, singing, literally in front of us, just straight out of nowhere. And it started there. And then all the way along the path to Wayland's Smithy, the birds were just leading us along. A couple of birds at a time would sit there and tweet at us until we approached them. And then another pair had come in and take over as soon as they'd been passed. And that was the whole way along. And then the rest of the day, it was just crazy. We went up to Rollright after that, and there were so many hawks, buzzards, and more than anything else, the red kites, even one that tried to get in the car. It flew so low over us. And Stuart had never seen hawks like that before. I'm used to seeing red kites around here, but not like that, not in that kind of quantity. And then the following day, we didn't really have a great deal to do, so I took him up to the Dashwood Mausoleum and the Hellfire Caves. Everything was shut. But 9 red kites came down and started playing right overhead, landing in front of us, taking off. I'd never seen anything like that before. So we ended up following the birds, literally.
What do you think was going on there? Were the birds trying to communicate? I mean, how do you rationalise that? How do you explain that to somebody?
Well, rationalise is definitely the wrong word, isn't it?
I know, yeah. But...
It's a gut feeling. We just knew we had to follow the birds. And It was just a daft thing. I literally turned the car off of main roads, followed them down little lanes, and we ended up at a hill fort that I'd never visited. There was a herd of deer there, just wandering in front of us. There were 2 crows guarding the entrance. And we walked onto the hill fort. There were a couple of prehistoric barrows there and White Leaf Cross, which is a chalk-cut figure on the hillside. And from there, we just watched the birds, and they were just playing with us. We watched them chasing us, coming up from the valley underneath us and coming up to us. So when we left there, we carried on following them. And on impulse, following the birds again, I turned into a little church that I've been meaning to visit for about 20 years that I've been down here, never ever gone to. And that's where everything kicked off, because we found it full of pictures of headless saints, medieval wall paintings, the maw of hell, saints that you wouldn't consider had necessarily been beheaded, if you know the stories, like St. George, for instance. And doing a little bit of research after that, we started to realise there was a lot more going on here than we'd anticipated. And just that one weekend set it all off, and we've been following the birds ever since.
Yeah, I joined you and followed the birds with you one weekend.
You did
repeating
indeed.
that initial weekend that you guys had had. It was very entertaining, and I call that magic. That's what I call magic.
Absolutely.
And you've got to be open to it. It's not like looking for it, but you've got to be open to it and accepting that something like following the birds could be something significant and something you should do. And, what
absolutely.
state of mind do you need to be in to get to that point, I guess, is a good question as well.
Open, as you say, that's exactly the word you need to be. We say open up and get out of the way. Take the ego out of the equation. Take the normal everyday thoughts out of the equation. And just let yourself be there with that moment, open to it, and see what the world's telling you. It's a difficult thing to differentiate, because it's very easy to read signs and portents into the slightest little thing that comes down, But if you happen to see a crow in a place where there are always crows, then that's not necessarily a particular sign. But it might be for you if that's the message that you need to hear at that particular moment.
Yeah.
And it's a relationship that builds up with the land, with the creatures of the land, with the magic that is in everything. Magic isn't something, as you well know, magic isn't something that's born of wonderful gestures and barbarous names and evocations. That's one way of accessing it. But the magic is in you, it's in the land, it's in the living being that we live upon. And finding a relationship with the divine as a personal relationship rather than a following religious dogma or any particular spiritual path. Finding that personal relationship with divinity in the land, which is an echo of a greater divinity, however you want to call that or however you want to see that. That brings you to life and brings the land to life for you as well.
Yeah, let's switch to that little church, because you guys took me there and I definitely felt the energy. And so that brings us into this concept of earth energies as well, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah.
And, I've been asked, what do you mean by earth energy? What is it? And I don't necessarily have an answer. And I wondered if you did.
To have an answer, I don't know. I think all we can ever do is try and describe how it feels and what you can perhaps do with it, how you can work with it. The earth energies, I suppose, are very similar to the electric currents, for instance, that you can see on some types of photography. I'm not going to mention Kirlian photography because that's been discounted and discredited a lot of the time. But we can measure energetic fields around a human body. We can use iron filings around a bar magnet and see those energetic fields. It's something very similar to that, but I think it is an expression of the life force of the planet. As simple as that.
That little church, talk to us a bit more about the significance of that church, because to me it really had not just an energy, but there was all kinds of mystery. I mean, you've mentioned some of them, but I think that church was the place that really started to take you off on a journey, isn't it, really?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Without that church...
what was it about that church that started that journey for you guys?
Again, I think it was the energies. I mean, you walk in there, and Stuart said it's like stepping into a warm bath. It's just so comfortable and welcoming. It's a tiny little medieval church. Many of the wall paintings are still there, but they're very simple ones, just line drawings in ochre. There are pilgrims' crosses there, cut into the stones. There's 2 wonderful windows in the east and west, which are quite unusual. Stuart maintains that the one in the west is actually heretical because it's not necessarily the right people at the foot of the cross. The one in the east is an Ascension of Christ. And I think that's what you find when you go to that church. You somehow understand that the Ascension of Christ isn't something that's divorced from us and belongs to one person, one divinity incarnate. It's something that we can all access. We can become an expression of that by getting in touch with these energies and looking for the same echoes within ourselves. But the site itself is interesting because it's, as I say, a very tiny little church, very simple. There's no ostentation there whatsoever. It's surrounded by yew trees, which, as you know, are the old witch trees that protect against the evil eye according to folklore. But it also stands on the site of an ancient place. We know that there's been a medieval nunnery there. There's been a Roman site there, and a Roman villa. There's an old earthwork there that predates the Romans. And then just behind it, you have a hill fort. So you're actually at the foot of the hill fort with prehistoric barrows on the top. There is a sacred well, a sacred spring, a healing spring that runs down the side of it. And there's everything in there. And on the walls, what set us off really thinking, as I said earlier, was that the fact that all the saints in there, almost all of them have been beheaded, apart from one, Bernard of Clairvaux, who was the founder of the Templars. Now, we shied right away from the Templars to begin with because that's been done and it's been overdone and better done. It was in the heat of the Dan Brown stuff, and we didn't really want to get caught up with that. But it's come back and bitten us anyway. So we've ended up having to look at that, and it all fits in with the beheading theme because with most symbolic art, as you're aware, the actual meaning is not what you see. The actual meaning of what they're telling you is something quite different. It's a symbol, and therefore it's trying to express something that goes beyond words. So we were thinking, well, what does this mean? We're beheading all these saints. You look at the hagiographies, and so many of the saints have not only been beheaded, but they've picked up the heads and held them in front of their hearts and continued to speak. And from that has come healing. Many healing springs are born where beheadings of saints have taken place, according to the legends. So what if what they're trying to say is that you need to remove the head, the logical brain, the mind that thinks purely in worldly terms, and start to think with the intelligence of the heart and bring a heart-centered intelligence to how you're living? And would that not make more sense? Because if you have someone who operates entirely through the heart, that can become quite sentimental. If you're someone that operates entirely through the head, it may not have empathy. But if you bring the two together and add in the movement centre, which is the earth centre, really, the physical body, and bring those all through together and operate through that balanced point of the heart, bringing intelligence to it, then you're going to live a better life and you're going to be happier.
At this point, I can't help bringing up the book that you and I wrote together on the hexagram, because what you're actually talking about is Tifereth in the center of the hexagram. That's it resonates that is exactly with the same sort of idea, that point of balance between heart and head. It also strikes me that when I ask you about magic and following the birds, isn't it potentially that in order to sort of see these things and go with it, you have to have moved your thinking a little bit into that sort of an arena as well? Otherwise, you would think of it from a head point of view and just discount it as some coincidence or stupidity that you just happen to see. Yeah. So I think absolutely it's all related. And I know that you continued on with the Templars even though you didn't want to.
We got
did
them
that
forced
take
down.
You anywhere? Or?
We got that forced down his throat, really. We had no option but to carry on with that. We just kept falling across the Templars left, right and centre. And especially when we started looking at the lays, strangely enough. Because when you consider that the Templars were set up originally to protect pilgrims en route to the Holy Land. So basically they were guarding a holy pathway, a sacred path. We found that the hermits, we tend to think of hermits as just a guy that wanders off to live a religious life alone. But actually their job was to protect and serve the highways, the pathways. And we found one place up in Derbyshire where all those things came together. And we wondered whether or not someone is still protecting these old sacred highways. The Romans, we think, took over an awful lot of the original British highways and got the credit for putting a road surface on them. But we won't go into the Romans because that just ends badly. But the Templars, we think, were carrying on that tradition. And we think it's still continuing today, because many of the places that could have been lost to urbanisation have been protected by the great families. And various orders that have descended from the Templars too are still in operation. And we actually found one vicar being inaugurated in his own church into one of these orders. At one point, the pictures of that were actually online. And we were quite taken by the fact that it was an order dedicated to St. Lazarus of Jerusalem. So we think this is still ongoing, and we think that a lot of places are still being protected behind the scenes by probably the great families of the land.
I know that you've also had, in sort of pursuing this weekend after weekend, I know you've had some really magical and, shall we even say, paranormal type experiences, and that's obviously one of my interests as well. Is there any example of a sort of more paranormal, something that is a bit more creepy?
Well, there was one particular site up in Sheffield we started working with. Stuart had taken me to the site of a fort that had been vitrified, a prehistoric hill fort. Nobody knows what the story is, and I started to get the story come through. We followed the story that I was being told, and it was really quite strange. It was as if I was seeing, and I tend not to see things, I tend to feel more than see. But I was as if I was seeing. And one particular site, I could even see the hut circles and the goats that were there and hear the children play. But every time we went there, I just ended up in floods of tears, because I was watching the journey of a seer who'd taken on the role of knowledge keeper for her people. And I watched her from a childhood through to her old age and finally to her death, and watched the preparations of her body. And I saw where they buried her, and I knew the story. And once we'd gone through that story and then worked with that story in ritual, I actually wrote the Feathered Seer, a whole weekend ritual based around that and based around the sites and the landscape. And once we'd done that, I can now go back to those sites without crying. I'm happy and I just feel at home. It's a peaceful place now. But until that story was told, it didn't give me any peace at all. It really didn't.
I just wonder also, where do you think this is taking you, and why do you think you're on this journey?
We're learning. I don't know where it's going to take us. It's not as if there's an exam at the end of it that will give us a particular qualification. It's just a journey towards understanding. And hopefully by sharing it, we can help other people follow their own personal journey to it as well. Because it's just such a wonderful thing to be able to walk out into a landscape and feel it to be alive.
And if people wanted to find out more about your exploration of the landscape and connection with the land, where would they go and what would they do?
They would probably buy The Initiate, which has just been re-released, which is a semi-fictional journey. The events in it are all true. The conversations are all true, but not necessarily said by the right people. Don and Wen take place of Stuart and I, and we tell the journey in fairly good detail. We follow that on through another 8 books. The last one will be released in the fairly near future, we hope. And it's just been an absolutely wonderful journey. Okay, we do descend into comedy at some certain points along the way, but if you can't laugh at spirituality, what's the point?
Absolutely. And just lastly, I mean, you've got a website, fancyvincent.com, and yeah. I've been following the conversations of Don and Wen. Now, is that something just for the website, or is that something from a book, or how does that fit in?
Oh, the conversations between Don and Wen are just literally emails based on the things that we're discovering and uncovering as we research the sites and the symbolism behind them. And we're bringing in so many things. Stuart's got the most fantastic mind. He can see connections where nobody else would notice them, and brings a wealth of knowledge to that almost twisted, convoluted explanations he comes up with sometimes that are actually perfectly sound when you put them into practice. And that's the test. You have to put these things into practice. If it doesn't work in ordinary life, it's not really working at all. So
yeah, I've been following those conversations. I think they're really good. They're absolutely each little email between the two of you in the guise of these fictional characters is really absolutely throbbing full of occult knowledge and fun at the same time. And of course, the dog, your dog, always has a mention.
Well, the small dog cannot be left out. She's actually scratching at the door now as we speak. She doesn't like it being separated from anything that's going on, as you well know, having met her. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, the small dog's got her own blog and gets far more fan mail than I do. Well, she's cuter than I am.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I think there's something. Animals always get more attention than humans. That's bizarre.
Well, she's got the advantage of being able to actually hold a mirror up to humanity.
She's got a writing career all of her own, hasn't she?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
People are interested in following her. She's written a few books and she has a blog, doesn't she? She
does. The Small Dogs blog is easy to find. That's what it's called. And she has several books out now. There was a Christmas special. She's done some poetry and her notes from a small dog, which is basically her views on humanity.
I have to laugh because periodically she writes about accompanying you and Stuart on one of these magical weekends, and she's always looking for bones which you won't allow her to eat.
Well, no, I mean, she can't get the distinction between the bones that she's allowed to eat and the bones she might dig up at an archaeological site.
That's very good. Okay, Sue, thanks. We'll wrap it up there.
My thanks to Sue Vincent for being my guest for this episode of The Magical World of G. Michael Vasey. For more details about Sue, her writings and activities, please see the description of this podcast. You can also visit her at her blog, Sue Vincent Daily Echo, at www.scvincent.com. I'd like to close today with a short poem. It's called Purpose, and it's from my Fatherhood collection. Purpose. Love the laughter, got to give it soul. No way that should matter, after all it's just another hole. Falling in and falling out, this is the year of doubt. I'm not sure what's up, not sure what's in or out. I'm spinning away slowly, lazily heading south. Words are forming, but they never leave my mouth. The journey continues, but does it have a purpose? Does it have a reason or why? Does it end when I die? Did anything truly matter? A burst of energy, scattered light too bright, a burning forgotten moment. Coming just to be going, here just to be gone. Now I am longing to know, to learn. What was it all about? Well, I'm still exploring reality and slowly trying to piece together my role in it. Will you join me on that journey? If so, please subscribe to this podcast series and come and see me at my website, www.garymvasey.com. Once again, thanks to Sue Vincent for being our guest today. Thank you for joining us. Happy imaginings. See you next time.